Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I'm Ana Lucia Jacome, Senior Project Leader and Human Rights Expert, part of the Division for People and Social Inclusion at the UN Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR. I remain at your disposal in case you want to explore possible synergies regarding the human rights of older persons. We are back. We are quite excited. Today we are starting the third year of our virtual roundtable series, Mainstreaming Knowledge on Aging. I encourage you, dear participants, to send your questions or comments to the speakers by using the Q&A Zoom tab at the bottom of your screens. For the welcome remarks, I have the honor to warmly welcome His Excellency Ambassador Luis Gallegos, President of UNITAR's Board of Trustees. He's President of the Global Initiative for Active Aging Foundation. He's an Ecuadorian diplomat with more than 50 years of experience. He's former Ecuadorian Minister of Foreign Affairs, former permanent representative to the UN in Geneva and New York, among other posts. He was the former chair of the ad hoc committee on a comprehensive and integral international convention to promote and protect the rights and dignity of persons with disabilities. Please, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ana Lucia, thank you to all the panelists, Alex, Michael, Julia, and all our friends. Welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, I am pleased to warmly welcome you all to the third year of the virtual round table series, Mainstreaming Knowledge on Aging. I would like to underline that this is an effort that UNITAR has done under the guidance of Assistant Secretary Nikhil Seth and Alex Mejia, the Director of the Division of People, and under the stewardship of Ana Lucia and her team. It has been outstanding that we have been able to have 2 years, and this is our third consecutive year of an effort of training around the world. Let me just say before I begin my intervention that UNITAR trains 500,000 people a year. And it has been a pleasure and an honor to be the chair of the board for these last 5 years, which approximately is 2.5 million, and we hope to get to 3 million by the end of the 6th year of me being the president of the board. In this endeavor, UNITAR and its international training centers from authorities and leaders, CIFAL Global Network, UNTESA, UNFA, IOM, UN Women, UNHCR, WHO, UHCHR, ITU, and ILO, together with a group of friends, the Human Rights of Older Persons in UN Geneva, the Global Initiative on Aging Foundation, GIA, the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuses, the International Longevity Center, and the NGO Committee of Aging Geneva, and the Harvard Law School Project on Disability have joined efforts to put together this initiative as a contribution to inclusive learning in the framework of the UN Decade on Healthy Aging. This multi-stakeholder initiative has served as the platform to awaken interests in aging issues from different perspectives. We have carefully observed how raising awareness and fostering capacities contribute to thinking outside the box toward better societies for all. All the strengths and needs of older persons shall be visible, and impactful actions shall be taken to ensure their effective, active, and meaningful participation, including the decision-making process. In this regard, this year's series focuses on enhancing the quality of life of older persons, aligning with our common agenda and the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development, and so the series aims to address gaps in the protection of human rights for older persons. Under this umbrella, we will be celebrating the following events: the impact of including older persons in the implementation of multilateral agreements and settings today. And let me just make a brief parenthesis here. I was last week I was in New York in the meetings of the UN Working Group on Aging. That after 14 years of work arrived at a consensus document, which I find is a very pertinent issue. I had a meeting with the Secretary General, Antonio Gutierrez, with Amina Mohammed, with his Chief of Cabinet and the head of DESA. And we punctually, we went over this issue and the participation of aging and aging and disability in the context of the future summits that are in the pipeline. The Summit of the Future, which will be in September. The issues relating to the Global Compact on Technology, which we find very important to include technology for the service of persons aging and persons with disabilities. We find that the negotiations and facilitation of the summit, the social summit for next year, is extremely important. We want to participate actively in the formulation of these issues, since they will be the guidelines of the future roadmaps that the UN and the member states will follow in making a better society for all persons, especially aging and persons with disabilities. The strengths and needs of older persons shall be visible, and impactful actions shall be taken to ensure this effective action. The impact of including older persons in the implementation of these multilateral agreements, the use of new technologies for promoting mental health, accompanying and support to improve the lives of persons to the 27th of June, the implications of demographic shifts on social and economic security through labor markets and leisure activities on the 19th of September, the intersectionality of discrimination faced by older persons on the 17th of October of 2024, and the protection of older persons in times of peace and war on the 21st of November 2024. These are very relevant issues that we must address during this year. We shall never forget the older persons bring a wealth of experience, wisdom, and perspective to different fields, enriching processes and outcomes in several significant ways. They possess the deep understanding of historical context and the evolution of issues, providing valuable insights and continuity in the discussions. Furthermore, their inclusion contributes to mentorship, enabling the transfer of knowledge and skills to younger generations. Their long careers result in extensive networks and established relations, facilitating smoother discussions and better cooperation. Moreover, with age often comes patience and resilience, qualities essential for enduring lengthy and complex negotiation processes. In post-conflict scenarios, older persons often have the credibility and respect necessary to mediate and negotiate peace, drawing on their lifelong experiences. Their leadership and accumulated wisdom enable them to navigate complex issues, fostering international cooperation, and advocate for significant causes. As we proceed with today's program, let us celebrate the invaluable contributions of the older statesmen and stateswomen. Their participation in multilateral processes offer numerous benefits, including enhanced historical perspectives, experienced negotiation skills, mentorship opportunities, and the ability to leverage extensive networks. Let us also recognize the importance of creating platforms for intergenerational dialogue within multilateral forums, fostering innovative solutions grounded in historical understanding. Thank you for joining us today. May our discussions inspire us all to work together for a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world, leveraging the wisdom and experience of older generations alongside the energy and innovation of younger ones. Let me end by an anecdote of my meeting with the Secretary General when we spoke about the leadership of governments. And sometimes, in my perception, I was telling him that my perception is that many governments are so aware of the complexity of the problem of the billion people who are aging and the tendency of a growing aging population toward 2050, that they prefer the leadership of these countries to kick the can down the road. And he answered, well, you also have to remind them that they are also aging, so they are part of this. And I think that was a very good answer to a very complex problem of governance that we are facing. Welcome once again. Let us have a fruitful and inspiring session. I wish you the best today, and thank you very much for this opportunity. It's a pleasure to participate as the chair of the UNITAR board. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Gallegos. As always, it's a big pleasure to warmly welcome you. To start with the discussion, let me introduce Mr. Alex Mejia, the Director of the Division for People and Social Inclusion and Director of the International Training Centers for Authorities and Leaders, CIFA Global Network. Besides of his experience working at the UN, he worked for years at private and public sector, including as the Vice Minister of Economy of the Republic of Ecuador. He served as alternate governor to the International Monetary Fund, to the World Bank, and to the Inter-American Development Bank, as well as a member of the Board of Directors of Ecuador's Central Bank. Alex, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ana Lucia, and thank you very much, Excellency, for giving us these excellent inaugural words and putting in perspective what we're trying to do here. So I would like to explain to all of you distinguished participants joining from very many places that the general objective, indeed, of this webinar is to identify existing actions and partnerships, as well as pending gaps for the effective inclusion and protection of older persons in multilateral settings and agreements. As you heard from Ambassador Gallegos, it is something that seems to be rather obvious. I do remember in other settings, perhaps disabilities, perhaps minority rights, the phrase that has become a battle cry that nothing about us without us. This is a very, very powerful comment and a very powerful concept that we wholeheartedly embrace at the United Nations and particularly at UNITAR, because how could we start negotiations, dialogue, work groups, and the like to arrive, we hope, to a global treaty, a global convention on the rights of older people without having older persons included. So that's the ethos, that's the impetus, as Ambassador Gallego said before, of these type of efforts here. And we will continue because this is a series, as you heard from him, but at UNITAR, indeed, we remain committed to that. So, including the perspective and the needs of older persons in multilateral agreements and policies remain crucial for promoting and protecting their human rights. They themselves as part of the process that involves them, right? We need to acknowledge their agency, their autonomy. We need to empower them with a voice that they do have and that they do intend to use, so as to finally engage them in shaping the policies that will be protecting themselves and hopefully improving the quality of their life. Healthy aging is more than a concept. It should become, in my opinion, a cultural shift, a cultural change. So, and just to put it in perspective of how we see it at UNITAR, to do so, to achieve this virtuous process, as described by Ambassador Gallegos, capacity building is critical. Raising awareness about these issues remains critical. I do remember, if I can share, Ambassador and distinguished panelists and participants also, that the late Kofi Annan, a man of great respect for us, when he retired after being Secretary General, he did come to live in Geneva, where we are based, and we used to have conversations with him. He kept repeating one concept, the concept of no capacity, no development. So if this is going to be a virtuous cycle moving forward, including all the persons, and indeed empowering also national and federal government officials to understand how to interact with the international architecture, we need to build their capacity. This is why this is important. So enough, I hope, to portray in front of your eyes the commitment that we have at UNITAR, at the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, to actually make a difference. So to all of you public sector officials, policy makers, policy practitioners, representatives of international organizations, and particularly participants today from civil society, for national human rights institutions, from academia, please help us. This is a quest that we cannot do alone. And in that sense, you will understand how important it is that this dialogue should include representatives of member states, And those member states, I don't want to be politically incorrect. As you know, at the United Nations, we will remain neutral. We are to remain neutral, but you read the news and I read the news. So we don't need to say or to name names, but we can name names of countries that are great champions for the rights of other persons, like Ecuador, where Ambassador Gallegos was a foreign minister, like the Dominican Republic, where the next speaker is a very senior, one of its most senior diplomats, and several other countries. Switzerland, of course, where we are, is very much committed to support this process. So let me just finalize from the side of UNITAR and trying to portray this particular topic of today, that we have chosen this concept because we believe it's so critical, right? To try and understand the impact of including all the persons in the implementation of multilateral agreements. It's not a given. It's not something that will then have repercussions. So we need, again, to better understand the impact of including all the persons in the implementation of multilateral agreements, particularly the ones that affect them. So because we consider it important to empower different stakeholders through knowledge, capacity building, training, and so on, we would like to see the series of events that Ana Lucia had started with this one today, 3 years in a row, also producing some capacity building training content, as we call it, material, for several courses that we will be offering and that we will be very happy to announce when the moment comes. So let me stop there. And now that we have His Excellency Ambassador Héctor Virgilio Alcántara with us, Excellency, it's quite an honor to see you again. He's a great friend of the United Nations and of UNITAR, of course, and it is our great pleasure to offer you the floor. Bienvenido. Floor is yours. You are muted, Excellency. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Just your microphone.
Okay. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Alex. Distinguished participant, it is an honor for me to address such an important issue as the inclusion of older persons in the implementation of multilateralism agreement. My country, the Dominican Republic, is an example of the transformative action of multilateralism. Through international cooperation, we have made progress in areas such as health, education, and sustainable development. However, for this achievement to be truly inclusive and sustainable, we must ensure that they accommodate everyone, especially our older persons, sources of experience and wisdom. First, it is essential to recognize that older persons have the same human rights as all other demographic groups. This is exactly what a campaign underway in this city about the right of persons with disability put it. It is a campaign in which it is asked to recognize that this group, the person with disability, has the right to housing, the right to autonomy, the right to work, the right to learn. And it concludes by saying, like everyone else, which is precisely what the Universal Declaration of Human Rights reminds us when it establishes that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity, and free and equal in rights. This fundamental principle must guide our policies and our actions. Nevertheless, older persons of face discrimination, face social exclusion, and face economic vulnerability. It is our responsibility as an international community to ensure that their rights are recognized, protected, promoted. Distinguished participants, despite what many wise men tell us, that the only time that exists is the now, the present, human beings live constantly worry about the future. And when we talk about generations, we always refer to young people as the representation of that time, the future time. But the current generational reality is showing us another vision, the vision that older persons are becoming the portrait of the future. It is obvious in the future, all those who are young now will be older persons. The statistics say clearly, those from the World Health Organization reveal that this year, 2024, in Europe, the population of people over 65 years of age will be larger than that of people under 15. And in 2030, 1 in 6 people in the world will be 60 years old or older. By that time, the population group age 60 and older will have risen from 1 billion in 2020 to 1.4 billion. And by 2050, the global population of people age 60 and over will have doubled to 2.1 billion. The inclusion of older persons in the implementation of multilateral agreement is not only a question of justice, it is also of practical wisdom. Let me highlight some of the most significant benefits. Wisdom and experience. Older persons have lived through historical changes, crises, and innovative solutions. Their experience can offer valuable perspectives to address current challenges. In the Dominican Republic, we have seen how community councils led by older persons have contributed significantly to social cohesion and conflict resolution. Strengthening the social fabric. The active participation of older persons in society strengthens intergenerational ties. When they are given a platform to share their knowledge, it promotes respect and solidarity between generations. This exchange is essential to build more cohesive and resilient societies. Sustainable development. Older persons can play a crucial role in promoting sustainable practices. In many rural communities in my country, for example, older persons are keepers of traditional knowledge about the sustainable use of natural resources. Involving them in development projects can lead to more balanced and sustainable solutions. Inclusive economy. The economic participation of older persons in an underestimated opportunity. With the world population aging, we must reimagine the role of older persons in the economy. From entrepreneurship to volunteering, their contribution can be enormous. In our country, we have implemented programs that promote employment and entrepreneurship among older persons with very promising results. Now, I will outline some concrete action for inclusion. Inclusive policies. To achieve this true inclusion of older persons in the implementation of multilateral agreement, I propose this following action. Inclusive policy. We urge member states to develop and adopt policies that promote the inclusion of older persons. This includes the removal of legal and social barriers that prevent their full participation. Social protection. It is crucial to guarantee solid social protection systems that ensure the well-being of older persons. Decent pension, access to quality health services, and social support are essential for their quality of life. Continuing education. Promote continuing education and training programs for older persons. This not only improves their skill and employment opportunity, it also promotes active and healthy aging. Active participation. Create platform for the active participation of older persons in decision-making at the local, national, and international level. Their voices must be heard at all levels of policy making. Research and data. Invest in collecting age disaggregated data to better understand the need and contribution of older persons. Robust evidence is essential for designing effective policy. Now, I conclude. The inclusion of older persons in the implementation of multilateralism agreement is a matter of human rights and also an opportunity to enrich our society. The Dominican Republic is committed to this vision and will continue to work to promote the inclusion, the dignity, and the respect of our older person. Together, we can build a future in which all generations collaborate for more just, equitable, and sustainable world. I thank you for your attention and for your commitment to this noble and necessary cause. Thank you.
Thanks to you, Excellency. Muchas gracias. As always, right on point. And thank you for being a champion of this cause, and particularly to your country, our admiration for staying the course. As we all know, distinguished participants, the session of the UN Open-Ended Working Group on the Aging has paved the way to what could be finally a ratification by the General Assembly, an adoption of the conclusions, and then the final stage, the real stage of what will it take to get a global convention on the rights of older people. So we are very happy that we're having this conversation at the same time that this has been occurring. And to continue now with a more specific, technical, if I may, view of this issue, we have three outstanding speakers representing the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights Office, the DESA, the Department of Social and Economic Affairs, DESA at the Secretariat in New York, and a very prestigious NGO, Help Age International, present in very many countries and rallying towards this cause and helping elderly persons in need. But after those three speakers, we will be very much appreciative of having again Dr. Michael Stein from Harvard Law School. He's the co-founder and executive director of the Harvard Law School Project on Disability and a visiting professor at the University of Harvard. So he will be hopefully providing an analysis on the legal obligations and responsibilities for all the persons at the international level. So a very interesting set of proceedings ahead that I will be asking my colleague, Madame Ana Lucia Jacome, also from UNITAR, to host. Ana Lucia, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Alex. Now, let me warmly welcome our dear colleague, Dr. Chitra Marie Massey, Chair of Section of the Rights of Older Persons at the Development Economic Social Issues Branch at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. She was the regional representative of the Office for the Pacific. She has worked for several years on a range of human rights issues, which include street children, countering torture, business and human rights, countering discrimination, climate change, supporting youth to engage with, and on several other human rights issues by strengthening national institutions' ability to work, including with policy, military, armed forces, judiciary, and establishing national human rights commissions, while working with civil society and non-governmental organizations. Please, Chitra, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the kind information, and thank you very much for that kind introduction, Ana Lucia. I have to say, Alex, after hearing His Excellency speak, it's a little bit of a tough act to follow, with both the ambassadors having covered all ground, you know. So let me just take a little bit of a step back and start from the point of, you know, what both of the former ambassadors alluded to, this whole framework and umbrella of human rights, the UN mechanisms. So if you actually look at it, it starts right from the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is integrated practically in every constitution in the world. So, you know, in some way or the other, despite us saying this is customary international law, it's a declaration, but it's customary international law by a very virtue of the fact that there is no constitution in the world, especially the ones that have been revised recently or newly formulated, that do not integrate the principles and the spirit of the UDHR. Now, that sounds wonderful, but the reality, as we all know, is that 75 years after the UDHR, we still have challenges ahead of us. So yes, there's a lot to be pleased about, but there's also a lot of work going forward. Now, within that framework, we also have the framework of the UN mechanisms, and we have, I want to begin a little bit perhaps just by giving a few little bits and pieces here and there, and hopefully we can weave a thread through them to turn it into something meaningful. So I have to say that 3 months ago, when I was told I would start with the work on the work of the work on this new mandate, one of the first things that I looked at was, how is the Universal Periodic Review doing on this count? You see, the Universal Periodic Review has politically been one of the most successful mechanisms in place within the UN framework. It has had 4 cycles. This is the 4th cycle. So you can say 12 years. And in 12 years, if you actually study the amount of recommendations that member states have made either to each other or have voluntarily offered to take on work with regard to the rights of older persons, we come down to a mere 100, 150. And if you further analyze them, you actually realize, while there may be about 40 or 50 of them, which are very broad and generic, how many of them are actually truly meaningful and give meaning to the words of participation, of implementation, of impact, and really looking at the very broad range of rights that we have all talked about? There are very few. I found it very interesting, and I took a few notes today, just as I was thinking of what we are going to talk about. And I actually found that the recommendations in the UN framework on the right to health, for example, have significantly increased since the COVID pandemic. But if you look at other issues like housing, water, they haven't shown much change, and they are very low on the radar for most member states. So here is something that I do want to bring up, that these are some basic issues that seem to be falling through the cracks. This is just looking at one of the most successful, if you want to call it that, politically too, where there has been great engagement, traction, and interest by everybody on following through with dedication and commitment. So clearly there is much work needed to be done here. Has there been a lot happening within the human rights framework? Yes, it has been a very busy space. If you look at the open-ended working group, it has been 14 years in deliberations. In 14 years, there have been over 800 documents submitted to this body, and a number of you have been working, all of us have been working on this as institutions. This is the first time we have a wonderful, significant moment in time when we actually have a decision that has been concretely recognizing here are the concrete gaps that exist. And by the way, we need to look at some additional things in keeping with the reality of the world, because law, as we know, doesn't function in vacuum. It follows real life. So when real life is showing us now that there is a data gap, there is challenges around digital information. There are challenges around the issues of taxation. There are challenges around the issues of economic crises. So we all have to work through this legal framework to adapt and ensure that the impact on the lives of older persons in an everyday common setting is going to be positive. And here I want to also pause and step back and say, this is certainly one of the most diverse demographics, and we have to recognize that. For example, if I am, shall we say, Richard Branson at 70s, my existence and challenges and experiences may be quite different from a ethnic minority somewhere in India or in Brazil, who comes from a disadvantaged background. And I think it is these individuals that we have to work and strive harder to make sure that their inclusion is meaningful and that the participation we are offering them is real. It is not just a checkbox on that list of saying, oh, we meet the criteria. Now, over here, if you don't mind, if I could just step back a little bit more and say that in the UPR recommendations, when I was looking at it over the last 12 years, we also find that while there has been emphasis on health, there have been a very happy development there, that in the last 2-3 years, we have seen an increase also in the reporting and concerns being addressed around violence being experienced by older persons and discrimination. On the other hand, you see that the economic independence seems to be in decline because insurance, tax are on the back foot. And here, I also feel it's very important, perhaps, that we also consider when we are talking about multilateral treaties, that it is very important to see how member states, especially from the developing world, are being impacted by this. Because if we just look at, let's say, if I come up with a state, of a figment of my imagination, let's say that we have a member state X that has governance issues. There is inefficiency, there is mismanagement, there is lack of transparency, there is elements of corruption, there is poverty, there are issues, and sometimes there's things being thrown that revenue collection is not transparent enough. We don't know what is happening. Now, in this scenario, let's assume that the country has faced a crisis. It could be a climate change crisis, or it could be a conflict, or it could just be simply that, let's say, we have another pandemic. What happens to a country like this? Most countries in the developing world may be struggling and maybe in a situation where they're negotiating or asking for debt or financial assistance. What happens in these cases? For me, it has been a very sharp learning curve here. When talking to, for example, colleagues in the IMF, there was a discussion. We said, so how do you deal with the human rights framework? And how do you keep that in mind when you're discussing this with member states who are approaching you? And there was a very interesting response. Of course, as the IMF, we are grounded in human rights principles. But then if you step back and you study and you look at the multilateral or the bilateral agreements that are happening, that network of protection, that safety net that human rights provides you is missing. Why? Because the member state that requested the financial support may not have brought it to the table. But is it only the responsibility of the member state that may not be aware of the fact that they can actually bring it to the IMF or a financial institution is a question that we should also explore. And why is this important? I'm not an economist, but for me, it's a very simple equation when I look at it. You see the fact that you have a debt and perhaps a crisis has made you default on your debt. You then find that the pressures increase on the financial architecture. What is the result? Currency is depreciated. It may increase the debt burden. What does it mean in principle when austerity measures are put in place? It means that governments may not be spending as much on things like health, on infrastructure, because they are struggling. What does it actually mean for that person who is over 65, over 75, who is struggling to make ends meet, whose pension may no longer be in existence, or who may not even have that network of social protection being offered, because as we know, social security is not available in every country in the world. So what happens in this situation when the costs have gone up? You have no increased income. Perhaps your income may have devalued because of the depreciation. It makes older population and especially women of who may have been working only in the informal sector much more vulnerable, including men, women, from ethnic minorities, from the intersectionality perhaps of your gender identity, your sexual orientation, all of and your disabilities, your mental abilities, your health situation, all of this comes into play and having an extremely negative impact, which then brings us back to the question and the wonderful phrase that the ambassador used, and Alex said it as well, nothing about us without us. So if we are serious about ensuring that there is a social protection network, that we are able to give a life of dignity to everybody, and here I am also very much, the sentence resonates very deeply with me when you remember that aging is inevitable. None of us has that magic elixir at this moment where we are going to be able to defeat this. All of us, governments, all of us in this seminar, all of us are going to age. It's the one thing that we can be sure of. So it's something to think about when you think of the fact that just between today and until 2030, which is not very far off because we're in 2024, the population increase is going to be more than 31% globally of older persons. Are we as an international community ready to face that challenge? What is going to happen when you have that situation where you have a much bigger group of people who need to have that network of protection, and you have a much smaller group of people that is going to have to work to provide that? So what are we doing in terms of planning? This is the time, and I think it's a pivotal moment in time, and the deliberations and the outcomes of the open-ended working group, combined with all the other developments that are happening globally, regionally, I think it's a very, very pivotal moment where this is the time where all of us have to come together in closer partnerships, closer collaboration to take this forward. But we also have to have, in my opinion, a much more perhaps a much more ambitious vision and drive on where to take this, in terms of how do we ensure all rights for all people? How do we ensure truly leaving no one behind? Or are these just mantras that we pull out from time to time? So if I can take a few more minutes, I hope I haven't gone over the time limit, but if I can just take a few more, 2 more minutes maybe, just to share 3 examples that I think are very telling. We all know that there has been recognition of older people's rights in some form or shape or the other. Very often we talk about this sometimes in a stereotype way where we assume that, some countries, old age is respected so much, and in some countries it's not. I think that this is something that we cannot just take for granted and assume that this is going to allow people to function well. We have to ensure that this is not a question of charity or a moral choice that we make, but as Ambassador pointed out in his opening remarks, His Excellency said that this is an entitlement and we have to make sure this happens. And I was talking to somebody who is working in actually in one of the research centers in the Caribbean, and she shared that actually because of the lack of an overall legal framework at the international level, the challenges are increased multiply at the local levels to make sure that you can get interest and engagement on the ground in taking this ahead. So I think this is why I think that this is a very pivotal moment for all of us in this discussion and dialogue. Can I also just share that when I was looking at policies, there was this interesting example that I was given about Australia that has a number of these bilateral agreements. Now, it's very interesting. It has bilateral agreements, but with the aim of coordinating social security benefits. And I was just wondering, this is very interesting. It looks at social security and pensions and how to ensure a better existence for people who may have worked as migrants or expatriates in 2 countries and are moving between them. But then there is also the interesting concept, why only with a few countries? And why only on social security? Is there some other things that we could learn from this? And when I was looking at that, I also saw, in addition, for example, that Australia and Singapore have a memorandum of understanding that looks at strengthening health cooperation. But the best example that I came across was actually Japan and Thailand in an agreement of cooperation where they're actually looking very specifically at how to ensure healthy aging with dignity. That was a very interesting experience for me to discover these examples, that it's basically an example of cooperation. It's not a full-fledged bilateral agreement. It's between JICA and the government of Thailand. But it just shows that while there are gaps and there are challenges, there is also a lot happening on a very positive front. It may be a little bit piecemeal, but we all know that this is among the challenges. And this is why I think that at this moment we are so much I think we're all poised that perhaps we are on the brink of actually a breakthrough now after 14 years, and we want to see how the resolution is accepted. The fact that it was adopted by consensus on the 24th of May has been a very big step forward. But I think that now it leads to the point of saying we all agree what next now, how do we push this envelope forward and how do we take it forward? And I think that, yes, I'm very grateful to UNITAR for having these series, because it allows us to discuss and share and learn from each other's experiences. And for me, I'm very delighted and grateful to be a part of it. I know that some of my colleagues here, I've been meeting them in other forums like Julia and Ana Lucia. We talk quite a bit. There are also people in the audience, I think, as civil society that are working very much and are very well informed on this. I think that in terms of the push and the drive, there's plenty happening. But I guess we also have to see how we can make sure all these different pieces and the engagement, participation, and inclusion in instruments that will have an impact, irrespective of whether it being comprehensive and complete or being piecemeal, looking at one aspect of our lives. I count myself in that group because I feel I'm getting closer to 60 than I'm getting to 50 now. So, it is like, okay, now what next? And what do we do? And how do we ensure that all of us working together are able to strengthen this partnership of cooperation to ensure that the impact that we want in terms of implementation and walking the talk actually happens? And I'm reminded of that because, walk the talk came to my mind because, as all of you know, last weekend, we were all trying to walk the talk in Geneva with WHO colleagues. And on that note, I will stop here and perhaps we can pick it up again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chitra, for highlighting some ongoing challenges that may not be that evident, but trigger several impacts at individual and collective level. As you have expressed, goodwill from states, from the authorities, indeed, along with joint efforts from different actors is key to moving forward from theory to practice. Thank you so much for your passion on the topic. Now we are going to learn from our dear colleague, Madame Julia Ferre. She's a social affairs officer at the Program on Aging section at the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs, year.The. With over 15 years of experience working at the regional and international levels in diverse areas of international development. In her current role, she supports member states and intergovernmental bodies with the UN in the implementation of plans and recommendations on older persons and population aging, as well as in mainstreaming population aging and integrating issues of relevance to older persons in the implementation of development frameworks. Please, Julia, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ana Lucia. Good day to everyone. Before I start, I want to thank UNITAR for providing us with the chance to share some of the work we do with you. So as it was said, I work in year.The in the program on aging. My team is a focal point on aging in the United Nations system. As such, we are tasked with supporting member states in several intergovernmental processes. We analyze trends and advise countries on policy options in the area of population aging and older persons. And we provide technical assistance to support countries in building their national capacities. Our primary mandate is to facilitate and promote the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, MIPA for short. And that is what I want to talk to you about today. First, I want to talk a bit about the nature of this document. And second, I'm going to share with you some aspects of its implementation. So going back to 2002, in Madrid, member states held the Second World Assembly on Aging and adopted two outcome documents. The first is the plan, MIPA, and the second was a political declaration. And I mentioned the political declaration because I have noticed people often forget about this aspect of the Second World Assembly on Aging, and I think it is a crucial document that lays out the commitment of countries on these issues. And by the way, we have not had any declaration like that since. I was reading it again for this event a couple of days ago, and it always strikes me how modern it was for its time. It talks about population aging as an opportunity and not only a challenge. And those of you who work and have been working on aging for a while know that that is still today a problem. It identifies this idea of a society for all ages, which I think is still very powerful. And it clearly highlights the role of the international community and other stakeholders in promoting cooperation on this area, not only at the national level, but also at the multilateral level, which is what we're talking about today. MIPA itself is also a very important milestone. It was the first development plan to put the issue of aging and old age on the international agenda. And it was also the first to link questions of aging to other existing frameworks for social and economic development and to human rights at the multilateral level. It's also quite unique in that before MIPA, the issue of population aging was thought by many as a standalone issue or an afterthought. But with its adoption, the General Assembly of the UN finally recognized that the demographic transformation of population aging has profound consequences for every aspect of the individual, community, for countries, and also at the international level. MIPA itself consists on 239 recommendations that are related to 35 objectives covering 18 different issues, and they are organized around 3 priority areas. The first is older persons and development, advancing health and well-being into old age, and ensuring the existence of enabling and supportive environments. The document was drafted through a very inclusive process that involved government. It also involved UN entities, academia, and civil society. I wish I had the time to go into the specifics of MIPA, and I hope I will encourage you, and you will all take the time to do so after this meeting. But some of the elements that were very new in this plan, and I wanted to highlight, were the inclusion of the notion of the celebration of longevity, age discrimination, and the call to adopt a life course approach. It also addressed the impact of inequalities. It talks about intergenerational solidarity. It highlighted the importance of the expectations and preferences of older persons as active actors, and it called for the recognition of their contribution, their strengths, and their humanity. Now, let me move to the second part and share a bit of information on its implementation. So the implementation of MIPA goes hand in hand with its review and appraisal process. This review and appraisal of the Madrid Plan of Action takes place every 5 years. We recently finished the 4th round, and we are ready to begin its 5th round. These 2 aspects, the implementation on the one hand and the review and appraisal on the other, are supposed to be interdependent and evolve in a continuous way, informing each other. So ideally, the way it works is that the information that we get from the review and appraisal exercise generates knowledge for policymakers as they are implementing MIPA and can support their concrete policy actions. The findings from the review and appraisal can also promote public awareness and improve engagement of different stakeholders on these issues, which was mentioned by several speakers already as very important. The review and appraisal of MIPA follows a bottom-up participatory approach. So this is something I really like about this plan. It goes from older persons through the representative organizations, other relevant stakeholders at the national level, regional level, and finally to the global level. What this means is that in practice, the review and appraisal of the implementation of MIPA establishes channel of communications and different mechanisms for participation and dialogue with various stakeholders and older persons themselves. And in doing so, it gives them a voice in decisions directly affecting them. The heavy weight of the MIPA review and appraisal falls on the 5 United Nations regional commissions. They facilitate inter-regional cooperation, they provide regional forums and undertake the regional reviews, and the synergy between the different levels of the national, regional, and global ensures that the outcomes of the intergovernmental processes at the regional level inform and are reflected at the global review at the end of each cycle here in New York. The last cycle of the 4th review and appraisal took place between 2019 and 2023. So as you might realize, it coincided with the COVID-19 pandemic. And for my team, it is very important to highlight, and we were actually very impressed that despite the pandemic, despite the great level of uncertainty, despite the increased pressure on resources from governments as they responded to the COVID crisis, 4 out of 7 member states in the world participated in the 4th review and appraisal of MIPA, 4 out of 7. This is looking at numbers at the national level, but I would also like to note that all 5 regions held their own regional processes. Several of them were at ministerial level, and 3 of them had political outcomes. Let me tell you that having worked in different offices of the UN and in different topics, this is a very good level of engagement that shows that member states are involved and are using MIPA as a key tool in policy. With that, I'll just finish with saying that we are very excited to start soon with the process of the 5th review and appraisal. We think that these processes can provide the impetus and the data and the information that member states need to better understand population aging in their respective countries and how to put forward policies that improve the lives of their older citizens. We also see these reviews and appraisals as an opportunity for stakeholders to bring their voices, their concerns, and their priorities to the attention of the governments. So I invite you all to keep an eye on this fifth review, to engage and to participate, and I look forward to any question you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Julia. We appreciate the clear explanation with core aspects of MIPA you help us today. In particular, its a participatory approach at different levels. That's a really good component, and that should be also applied in different settings. Also, we take this opportunity to express our appreciation for all your leadership in the framework of the UN Interagency Network on Aging. It's a pleasure that now it's formal, this UN network, and as UNITAR, we are quite happy of being part of that. Now, to continue, we have the pleasure of welcoming Madam Marcela Bustamante. She's the regional representative of HelpAge International, Bogota, Colombia. She has wide experience on development issues. She was the head of international affairs at the Colombian Ombudsman Office, leading diverse networks across the Andean and Ibero-American regions of ombudsmen. She worked with the German Cooperation Agency to advise the Peruvian government in implementing international humanitarian law. Please, Marcela, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for having me today. I am going to share my presentation. Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I would like to start my presentation highlighting the important steps that the open-ended working group has taken last week. My previous colleagues have referred about these important steps in terms of considering of having a binding instrument as a recommendation for the protection of people's rights. And what is coming next is very uncertain, but I think it is important to have the Inter-American Convention for the protection of people's rights as a reference for the future. It's a good reference, I think, for the international community and the process that is going to take place after these important steps. And I would like to share today a recently decision made by the Colombian Constitutional Court, because allow me to showcase how important it's for all people rights to have this kind of framework. And also through this case, I am going to show how important or convenient is for judges and courts to rely their decision on this kind of binding instrument. But on the other hand, allow me to show the agency that all people can play in the implementation of this kind of multilateral agreement that is one of the objects in these kind of important spaces. So let's start. Mr. Carlos is 77 years old, and he needed to get cardiovascular stress tests, and ordered by his doctor, and he tried to access this test through different medical centers, and the medical centers rejected to practice this test, arguing that Mr. Carlos has to bring his companion or caregivers. And Mr. Carlos said that he's alone, that he cannot rely on his family or social network because it's very alone. He's living alone, but the medical center just rescheduled the test, and Mr. Carlos insisted that the condition of being alone wouldn't change. So Mr. Carlos appealed to the justice, and the first judges and the second judges agreed that the medical center didn't, they don't deny the service. They don't ignore his right of accessing the health. They just following the medical center, just follow the protocol, and according with the protocol, all people have to bring their own caregivers or companion by doing this test. Mr. Carlos appealed to after submitting an appellation to go through the second instance, and then this decision was in the same as the first judges. Mr. Carlos turned to the Constitutional Court requesting that his case has to be reviewed because, first of all, he is an old man, that he is entitled to have a special protection, and second, because he is alone and obviously he is exposed or he's in a more vulnerability condition. I just wanted to stop here to highlight the role that all people can play, because thanks to Mr. Carlos and his agency to go through the first judges, second judges, and then to go to the court appealing the attention, show how important is how important is all people roles and in framing not just public policies but also to influence the decision of the judges. The Colombian court asked opinion to different experts and organizations, and help page position. We provide a concept by saying that it is important that the health service can apply the aging approach, and it is important to get a balance between protection, autonomy, and independence. You can see the medical center were following a protocol as a protection measure, but in the other hand, we see Mr. Carlos and his right to be independent, to be autonomous, and to access to the health service. So the only way to get a balance is through innovative care services that pay attention to specific conditions like gender, race, age, disability, and degree of dependency. Here you can see the different points of the Colombian court analysis, and I would like to refer some of them. The first one is the Colombian Constitutional Court considered that care is a fundamental right because it's linked to the guarantee to other rights like human dignity, autonomy, independence, recreation, and health. The second concept that I would like also to recall in this analysis is that the Colombian court introduced the concept of a minimum vital of affection. All people have the right to achieve the poverty line in terms of housing, accessing to health, accessing to food, clothes, etc. But it's also important to ensure a minimum vital of affections based on social network, partnerships, integrated in the communities, and it's a very interesting umbrella for people that are living alone. And finally, the decision of the court, and is very important precedent for next cases in the future, that the obligation to provide a caregivers or a companion by practicing this kind of tests is from the state. It has to be transferred to the states, and not the old people who are living alone have to provide them. It's a very important decision. And as you know, the Colombian Constitutional Court is a good reference as well across the region. So I just wanted to finalize, thanks to Mr. Carlos, and actually Mr. Carlos is another name, is a name that the court used, but Mr. Carlos is not the real name. But thanks to Mr. Carlos was and his agency and his awareness of his rights was able to make visible the loneliness that are affecting all people in accessing their rights. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Marcela, for sharing this good example coming from a Latin American country. And of course, it's quite good to have their legally binding instrument focused specifically on the protection of the human rights of older persons. So this is a good example regarding how to implement an international instrument, and we will try our best to follow up on the implementation now of the Constitutional Court, just to check how this story ends. So we appreciate your time today, and now it's a big pleasure to welcome back to the series Professor Michael Stein. He's co-founder and executive director of the Harvard Law School Project on Disability. Visiting professor are at Harvard since 2005. He's considered one of the world's leading experts on disability law and policy. He participated in the drafting of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and has been quite involved towards a new instrument specifically focused on the human rights of older persons. He has wide experience working with different stakeholders around the world, including on policies and advice to several UN bodies, national human rights institutions. He has brought landmark disability rights litigation globally, and he has also received numerous awards in recognition of his transformative work. Please, Dr. Stein, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for allowing my participation, and thank you for allowing the Harvard Law School Project on Disability to be one of your friends and sponsors. I'd like to begin by thanking the co-panelists. I'm grateful for that, and also to echo some of their words. Ambassador Gallegos, pointing out that we need to leverage the experience of the older generation, which Ambassador Alcantara framed as using the wisdom of previous generations. But I'd like also to come back to Alex Mejia's point about partnerships with civil society. And here, Dr. Massey made some points that I'd like to elaborate upon, if you'll forgive me. We are all moving as expeditiously as we can towards trying to achieve a treaty specialized for the protection and promotion of the rights of older persons. And as Dr. Massey pointed out, one of the reasons that we are concerned about the protection of older persons is that the universality of UN human rights treaties has proven in practice not to be universal. This was exactly the case that we had with persons with disabilities, and was one of the overarching rationales for convincing the General Assembly to allow us to go forward and to consider the need for a treaty under the supreme wisdom and guidance of His Excellency Ambassador Gallegos. At the time when it was proposed to the General Assembly, there was an absolutely thorough, scientific, but damning report given to the UN. It was written under the auspices of then UN High Commissioner Mary Robinson, and it was authored by Professor Gerard Quinn, who until recently also served as the Special Rapporteur on Disability, and by Professor Teresia Degener, who at one point was also the chair of the CRPD committee. So things go full circle. And it pointed out in very graphic detail how people with disabilities had not been included in complaints to the treaty bodies, had not been included in UN programming. Most glaringly, the Millennium Development Goals don't have the word disability in them. Of course, we have made improvements now due to the SDGs. And why it was absolutely necessary to make the words "nothing about us without us" a reality. Following the CRPD, to be quite frank, we all speak about intersectionality and about making the treaty bodies more efficient. This goes all the way back to the wisdom of the late Secretary General Kofi Annan and the treaty body reforms. And yet, with due respect to everyone, they're not that efficient as far as intersectionality. I can give you empirical evidence on that. So following the first years of the CRPD, I did a 10-year study with my former PhD student. It's in the Journal of Human Rights. And basically, we see that it's the new flavor of ice cream, and treaty bodies get excited by disability, and they do a little bit of work over the first few years and actually substantively address people with disabilities, and then they reach a plateau. And the plateau becomes disability is one of those vulnerable groups that are lumped together and that treaty bodies often, but not always, make reference to in their concluding observations. Of course, that's better than not being mentioned at all, but it doesn't go to the substance. It doesn't drill down to actual rights, and it does nothing as far as implementing these rights, because it's hard enough to get states to follow recommendations when they're very specific, let alone when they're vague, as in handle these groups. What we found, though, if I go off the script and talk about personalities, is that people who are not specifically enumerated get enumerated when the personalities in charge are dedicated to doing so. And I'll give credit to Professor Yang-Hee Lee, now our expert on Myanmar. When she chaired the Convention on the Rights of the Child's Committee, she made a commitment in April of 2007 at a conference that we attended to specifically focus on children with disabilities, and she did so. If you look at the jurisprudence of the concluding observations during that time, there's a dramatic increase of recognizing that children with disabilities should be included. If we look now at the work of the CIROC Committee, Ana Pelez, who is a disability rights advocate, she happens to be blind, served on the CRPD committee, is ensuring that women with disabilities are included and are part of the agenda. We also have our good friend, Professor Rangita, who's sitting on the committee and is also trying to ensure that there's intersectionality. But without those strong personalities and their commitments, people who are not specifically enumerated more than often wind up being neglected. And that is the case that we have with older persons. They are, of course, persons. They are covered under the Universal Declaration. They are, of course, women and people with disabilities and people of different races and so on. But they're not being included in the jurisprudence because there's no reason to do so. So that's one reason for the treaty. But syncing it to what we're speaking about today, you need civil society. Civil society is absolutely, positively central and essential to reminding committees at each and every one of their sessions, to putting together civil society reports. Maybe not necessarily full-blown shadow reports of all the articles, but perhaps specific communications that address particular issues: access to healthcare, access to ICT, access to safe living conditions, and so on. Civil society is absolutely, positively at the center of it. And again, here from the disability work, we see a vast difference between the early years post-CRPD, when the International Disability Alliance was getting itself organized, and it's a very interesting and complex creature. But what it has done now is, besides working with national level disability groups, it has gone to UPR, it has gone to other committees, and it has made interventions at those committees and issued communications related to state reports. The same is absolutely necessary for the rights of elder persons. And there are some fabulous NGOs who work very hard. I would say, as an encouragement, not a criticism, there are not enough. We need greater force from civil society. We need greater voice from them. It's easy for me to say because it involves a lot of work and a lot of focus. But if we are to be serious about having a treaty and/or having the presence and the wisdom and the needs and concerns of older persons presented at the UN level, it must rest with civil society to not only encourage their own governments, but also to encourage treaty bodies to reflect upon them. So those are my thoughts. They're thoughts of encouragement. I look forward to working with everyone, and thank you for allowing my participation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stein. As always, it's a pleasure to learn from you. Now, please let me give the floor back to Mr. Alex Mejia, please.
Thank you, Dr. Stein. Thank you, Ana Lucia. Fascinating ruminations, analysis, and comments. Because time is short, in theory, we will have only 3 minutes, but this is not possible because there is too much interest, and we have been receiving questions and so on. Let me just propose something that we do to wrap up and to leave behind perhaps a message. Normally, when we are pressed for time, we simply ask the panelists to give us a very short, a minute or two, comment on what do you think the participants should take from here? What would be the main message that you would like to share? So if I may, let me invite you to do so. At the very end, I'll ask His Excellency Ambassador Gallegos just to say a few closing remarks and we wrap up. So let me begin with Dr. Chitra Mari Masi. Fascinating to hear you, Chitra. Always, it's an honor to have a colleague like you. What will be the message? The floor is yours.
Oh, thank you. You put me on the spot because I was just racking my brain out of everything. What would I choose as the one takeaway? I don't know. You know, it's very interesting because there's so much to compress it in one sentence. For me, I would say the key word for me from this is that when both the excellencies, the ambassadors and you were speaking, there were 6 words that stood out for me: implementation, impact, agency, autonomy. And if I put them together and I think, you know, I come back to something that we repeat very often. It's all about dignity. And for me, these are all components of dignity. So for us, whether it is participation, whether it is inclusion, whether it is discrimination, I think they're all there in the word dignity on how to counter them. So for me, my takeaway would be that we use this word very often, but we're not really doing justice to it.
Thank you.
For me,
right.
Thank you.
Right on point, as always. Very good. Our colleague, Julia Ferre. Julia, you have a lot of insight. What will it be? What message will you leave for the participants?
Right. So, I mean, 1 minute is very short. I'll just, I feel like in this event, we usually end up with a very negative note. And I understand because, as you said, I work on many different issues, not only on MIPA. We are the co-secretary of the Open-Ended Working Group on Aging. We work on many other things, and it can be very frustrating, and I agree. But I think from our point of view, a population aging, the data is just, the changes a population aging is going to bring are so far-reaching that we are convinced that this will become a major issue of interest of the international community sooner than later. And for me, I have a very expansive view of what we need, and we need as many tools at our disposal as possible to prepare for that moment. So we need a strong human rights framework so that, as Marcela said, Carlos has the rights that he deserves. We need a strong MIPA. We need mainstreaming aging in other development frameworks. We need to make sure that actors at the international level who are not currently involved in these issues become involved. And I'll, in addition to that, I want to finish with an example that was mentioned by Ana Lucia. And it's the UN Interagency Group on Aging, IAGA. This is a group that was informal until a year and a half ago. When it was formalized, it's a network of UN entities and agencies that collaborate on population aging. And we are very hopeful that this will be part of the push to enhance coordination within the UN and to continue strengthening multilateral frameworks. Thank you.
Thanks to you, right on point as well. And now to our colleague, Marcela Bustamante. You have a unique perspective from your side and on the ground as well. What would be the message that you would like to leave in the minds of the participants?
The voice of all people is key. Es a important factor to achieve changes. It's something that HelpAge is focusing in strengthening the All People Association, the awareness, their organization, their networks, and the movement. Mr. Carlos is an exception, no, because he is aware of his rights. He knows the different resources that he can go through to access to until the court. That is an exception. To have several Carlos, we need to strengthen the capacity of all people and so that they can be aware of their rights.
Very much so, and that's why we get motivation to do what we are doing. But with that, I'm thanking again, of course, His Excellency Ambassador Alcantara of the Dominican Republic. It's been a pleasure to get to hear you on behalf of your member state, and of course, your colleagues as well. I see Madame Alfonsina Gonzalez, which I simply wanted to recognize, and several other colleagues. But thank you, Ambassador Alcantara, and knowing that unfortunately it's 5:03 in Geneva, I think we have used wise these 3 extra minutes. So from UNITAR and from my side and my team, strong recognition to Ana Lucia, of course, to the rest of the colleagues of communications. We are very happy to host these events. And now for final closing remarks, His Excellency Ambassador Luis Gallegos, the chairman of the board of Board of Trustees of UNITAR. Excellency, welcome.
Alex, I think you missed Michael. No concluding remarks. Okay.
This is my mistake. No, this is my mistake, Michael, and I ask for your apologies. Your voice is very important for us, and thank you for supporting us throughout the years. Any final message, perhaps?
Let's make nothing about us without us a reality, and I agree by incorporation with everything the ambassador says.
Michael,
a true diplomat. A true diplomat. I think also, Excellency, now that you allow me to add something. Alfonsina, you were saying something?
Yeah, sorry, just before the ambassador to take the floor, my ambassador needed to leave. As you know, there is several things going on here in Geneva, but just you to confirm, as you know, I'm working in the Council of the Human Rights, and before he left, we were talking about how important is all the inputs that we, like young people, receive from older persons. As you know, my ambassador is 80 years old, and all the knowledge I have received through now the membership of the Council of the Human Rights, the possibilities to know about the history, about what things happens before is really like important in order to be able to understand the multilateralism and how things are going on now. The present is just a result of what happened before. And sometimes what is in the books is not exactly what happened backstage. And when you have an ambassador like mine, we're talking about that I'm really impressed about, like all the knowledge he has about what really happened behind everything. And that's one of the most important things, how you can have all these inputs as the new generation to use it for the best of the peace and the protection of the human rights and how things can be like going forward and not like happen in the past. So I really want to thank you on the name of my country and on the name of my ambassador. We are really sorry that he needed to leave. We are more than happy to collaborate, and as we promoting of the human rights of the older person, please count of the Dominican Republic. We're going to continue promoting through the Council of the Human Rights all the rights of the older persons, and we hope to be able to collaborate in another scenarios and to be present as well. Thank you once again. Thank you to UNITAR, to the ambassadors, His Excellencies, and please count on us every time. Thank you.
Thanks to you, indeed, Alfonsina. Thank you for putting our attention as we wrap up on wisdom, the biggest asset that we can muster. Now, finally, His Excellency Luis Gallegos, Chairman of the Board of Trustees of UNITAR.
So sorry for the interjection, Alex. It's been a pleasure participating in this meeting. I think that I joined Michael in saying that we learn from all these interventions and every one of your experience. I think that I concur with Madame Masi that the word is dignity. All of us who are aging, I am 77. When we began GIA, we began because we saw what happened in the pandemic. We lived to see people die, and the majority of them died in this group and the group with disabilities. And what we're looking for in the convention to protect the rights of persons who are aging is dignity. Not only to live with dignity, but to die with dignity. So this is not about only a group. It's about everyone, because if you are lucky, you will age. And in 26 years, the world will see, as Julia said, a change in world society that will mean 2 billion people with an impact group of 4 billion people, 6 billion people immersed in the issue of aging. And this will change substantially the world community. What we are saying today is only alerting the member states and the agencies of the world of what will happen. And I think it's a very powerful message. And we have to keep on batting the drums that nothing about us without us, but it has to be more of a narrative that is impactful and is rationalized to look for solutions for the dignity of all. And I thank you very much for participating in this event.
Thank you very much. This webinar is adjourned. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Goodbye.
you.